U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin on Monday played down hopes that Washington and Beijing would strike a deal during negotiations this week to end the trade war, suggesting that there could be further discussions after high-level talks scheduled for Wednesday and Thursday in Washington. Mnuchin said, "We do have another 30 days after this, so my expectation is that we'll make significant progress at these meetings, but I would just emphasize these are complicated issues. Watch, clock is ticking on 90-day truce. Both sides have agreed on a March 1 deadline for the current round of negotiations, after which the U.S. could increase tariffs on $200 billion of Chinese imports if a deal is not reached." Speaking at a White House press briefing, Mnuchin said he and U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer were looking forward to this week's negotiations, which will be led on the Chinese side by Vice Premier Liu He. At the top of the agenda, Mnuchin said, were issues of forced joint ventures, in which U.S. firms are coerced into handing over technology in return for market access, enforcement of any brokered agreements and IP protection. U.S. entrepreneurs' choice, rewards of doing business in China outweigh risks. Also on the table is Beijing's pledge to purchase a substantial amount of goods and services from the United States, the White House said on Monday. Discussions have been continuing since a U.S. delegation visited Beijing this month for mid-level talks, Mnuchin said. "I think there's been significant movement," he said, "and we're working through what are still very complicated issues." Liu will meet with U.S. President Donald Trump on Thursday, White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said at the briefing, which was the first in 41 days. President Trump is committed to achieving greater market access for U.S. exports and better treatment for our farmers, ranchers and businesses, Sanders said. Larry Kudlow, Trump's top economic advisor, said at the same briefing that the president had expressed guarded optimism about this week's talks. On Wednesday, Trump told reporters that the U.S. was doing very well in negotiations with China, but suggested that he did not care whether this week's talks resulted in a deal. "One way or the other, we're going to do well," he said. Will China's new forced technology transfer law satisfy U.S. concerns? The scope of these talks will be the broadest and deepest in U.S.-China history, Kudlow said. "We've never had anything this comprehensive." This week's talks will take place amid deepening tensions over the U.S. legal pursuit of Chinese telecommunications giant Huawei. On Monday, the U.S. Department of Justice unsealed a series of indictments against the company, including theft of trade secrets from T-Mobile. Acting U.S. Attorney General Matthew Whitaker also said the U.S. would soon issue its extradition request to Canada in the case of Huawei Chief Financial Officer Meng Wanzhou. Watch, Huawei CFO released on bail. Meng is out on bail in Vancouver after being detained in December at the request of the U.S. over charges of financial fraud aimed at skirting sanctions on Iran. Beijing has called her arrest unreasonable and an act of hegemony by the U.S. Despite the proximity of the Justice Department's announcements to this week's trade talks, Sanders denied a strategic connection. "They're a totally separate process," she said. The negotiations on the trade front will continue to be ongoing. Additional reporting by Wendy Wu.